If you like what we do here over at Aircrew Interview and would like to support us and help us grow, you can head over to our Patreon channel at patreon.com/Aircrew Interview, where you can donate monthly. We have different tiers ranging from $1 per month right up to $25, with each tier offering different rewards. All the monthly donations greatly help us to continue creating these video and audio interviews, so please take a look and I thank you in advance. Enjoy.
So, Anil, when did you first become interested in aviation?
Well, Mike, as a little boy, when I was just about 10 years old, that was in 1971, we had the war with Pakistan, which was the last big war that the two countries faced. And we were living in a town up in North India, where I could hear the sounds of these, jets flying overhead. And as a little boy, I was intrigued. That city, of course, had a lot of people who would go to the National Defense Academy, and so was it from our school. So somehow I got enamored by this profession of aviation, and we didn't have any history of anyone being from the Air Force in the family. But my father used to work in the ordnance factories, so in some way he was related to this. And I thought that if I grow up, I need to become a pilot, and I need to become a fighter pilot.
And it worked out for you. So, yeah, what year did you join the Indian Air Force? And can you talk us through some of the aircraft you started training on?
Yeah, so I appeared for the National Defense Academy entrance examination, and I was very clear that I wanted to join the Air Force. And it just so happened that I cleared the written exam and the interview process, which, the Services Selection Board, which takes over 4 or 5 days, at the end of which you have a medical, and then the merit list gets drawn up. And you give your choice when you're filling the form which service you want to join, and obviously the medicals are held according to that. So it just so happened that I was not cleared for the Air Force medical. And I came back home, and those days there were no mobile phones. I mean, you couldn't get back to the family. I was away somewhere. I came back home and I told my father, I said, I am not joining, because they told me you could join the Army or the Navy.
Right.
So I said, if it's not Air Force, I'm not going. Then we found out that there was a provision to appeal against the medical board decision, which I did. And then a higher authority did another medical check on me, and they cleared me for the purpose for which I was rejected. And I was incidentally rejected for, they call it scoliosis, which is the curvature of your spine. I think in the olden days, you didn't have any MRIs, you had some X-rays, and some chap looked at it and thought that this boy is not fit for the Air Force.
Wow.
So I cleared the appeal medical board, and I was fit to become an Air Force cadet, and there I was joining the academy. So January of 1979, I joined the National Defense Academy, where we underwent training for 3 years, which was common for the first 5 semesters, 5 terms, that is 2.5 years. In the last term, we had all the 3 services cadets graduated into doing more training of their respective services. So the Air Force cadets, we did some gliding on the Sedberg glider, and we did about 30 odd launches. And after that, we went on to the elementary flying school, flying piston engine aircraft, that is the HT2. And then the jets, the Kirans, and 6 months of the piston engine, 6 months of the Kiran, and then we got commissioned into the Air Force. And this was at the same time where the trifurcation also took place into helicopters, fighters, and transports. The interesting thing about what happened in the academy was that while I was undergoing my flying training, in the initial part when we did the piston engine, there was no solo flying involved. And our course, last course to fly the HT2, because that aircraft was being phased out. So since we were the last course, we did not do any solo. The instructional hours were all dual, that is about 30 hours of flying. I was amongst the first few to go solo in my course on the jet aircraft. And after about six sorties, solo sorties, which basically involved, your handling and circuit and landing phase, the first phase which was outside the sector uh, was low flying with chase. So I was in the cockpit alone, and I had two instructors who were chasing me. We went to the sector, we did our low flying, and we came back for rejoin. And while we were descending down from 4,500 feet to circuit altitude to rejoin circuit and land, I suddenly felt there was something amiss. Uh, I couldn't hear the sound of the engine. And mind you, I just had about 4 or 5 hours of total, flying solo experience at that stage. I'm a young boy of 20 years old. And so as I began to open throttle and simultaneously select air brakes in so that I could level out at circuit altitude, I looked inside. I found all the gauges were off the clock, and the air brakes wouldn't move, and there was no throttle. I pressed the PTT. There was no transmission. So I didn't know what to do. And I must tell you that those seconds, 1 or 2 seconds, seemed like years to me. They stretched. And the thoughts that flashed into my mind were, this is it? How can I die so soon? I mean, it's too early. And whatever happened, I think the survival instinct kicked in. And you had the emergency jettison button, which was on the front windshield. I just, canopy jettison, I pulled the handle, and then a couple of seconds later, I saw the chute had opened, and I was alive.
Wow, what an incredible story.
Into the Air Force.
But let's talk about your frontline aircraft. And is it pronounced Airjet or Ajet? Ajeet?
Ajeet. Ajeet is in the Hindi language. It means invincible.
Wow, interesting. So, what were your first thoughts of this aircraft? Because it's a tiny little thing.
Yeah. So, just to go back a little bit, when after commissioning, we just did about 70 odd hours on the Hunters. And after the Hunters, people went on to the MiG-21s or to the Western or the Russian fleets. And I went to the Ajeets. And I was the only, officer from my course who went to the Ajeets. This aircraft was actually a fighter pilot's dream. You are literally like Superman, with wings around your body, and you had no ladder. You would jump into the aircraft, a total of some 28 or 29 feet in length, and just about 2,000 kgs in weight. After the sortie, the way the aircraft was turned around was somebody sat on the tail, somebody lifted the nose, and you turned it around. You needed 3 or 4 people to turn around the aircraft, but a fantastic machine to fly, excellent at the controls. We used to wear a patch on our sleeves which said the last real fighter. And that was because, you would probably be aware when the RAF flew the Nats, the Nat trainer was used as a trainer for fighter flying. But the Indian Air Force didn't get any trainer. And in the Ajeet aircraft, when you went solo, you actually went solo the first time.
Wow. Yeah.
Because the dual on a Hunter, which was no comparison. So we very proudly wore that on our, shoulders, the last real fighter. And it stayed till till its end of its service life. I think the Ajeet trainer prototype was developed by HAL, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, and but but it never saw service life. I think the first prototype crashed, the second one never entered service, and the aircraft completed its flying stint in the Indian Air Force without a trainer.
Yeah. So what was the actual main role of the aircraft with the Indian Air Force?
Yeah, so you see, those were the days when radars on the aircraft were just about coming in, and the main role of the aircraft was air defense,
Right.
basically. So we were supposed to do combat air patrol over the airfields or over vital areas and vital points, as also some amount of escorts to the strikes. Because of its diminutive size, it was very difficult to pick an Ajeet in the sky, and those days were of close combat. So you had to get into a turning or a vertical fight to shoot the other person down. And since the other people, that is the ones who were flying the MiG-21s, were used to seeing large aircraft in the sky, because you normally fly in formation with your own squadrons. You don't fly with the other squadrons. So they found it very difficult to pick up an Ajeet. And since we flew only formations with other Ajeet aircraft, we could pick up a MiG-21 at say 6, 7, 8 kilometers. So that gave that gave you an edge.
Yeah.
In terms of rate of climb, it could beat the MiG-21. 20,000 feet. It was fantastic. I mean, the trim change was -8 degrees when you retracted undercarriage. So the moment you retracted undercarriage, when you next saw the altimeter, you were at 8 or 9,000 feet. It was like
impressive.
that, unless
Wow.
you control it with the forward pressure of the stick.
So, Neil, how did the aircraft handle? I mean, you mentioned just before the climb rate was incredible, but I've heard the roll rate is amazing on the aircraft as well.
Yeah, so you would find that in terms of wing loading, the aircraft was fantastic. 0.6 to 1. The turn rate was fantastic of the Ajeet. The climb rate was very good. So when you looked at altitudes of, I would say, less than 3 kilometers or 10,000 to 12,000 feet, the Ajeet could very easily beat a MiG-21 in those days. There were some issues with the NAT in terms of the avionics, which were older, and the hydraulic systems had a problem. So when the design of the Ajeet came in, they tried to improve upon these aspects to a large extent. The only problem that the Ajeet faced, or even the NAT for that matter, was because the gun was through the intake. The front gun.
Yes.
30 mm, if you remember. So there would be a lot of gun stoppages in the aircraft because of the design of the way the belt, moved, and disturbance from the airflow and all. But other than that, we fired rockets, we fired bombs, we did a lot of front gun firing, and this aircraft in the Indian Air Force came to be known as the Saber Slayer. Because in both the 65-71 wars, it shot down 8 Sabres.
So was the aircraft right for the Indian Air Force, and how did other pilots view it?
The aircraft, because the aircraft was right for the Indian Air Force, and because of the way it acquitted itself in both the conflicts, that is the 65 and the 71 wars, is why the decision was taken by the Indian Air Force to manufacture this aircraft indigenously as the Ajeet, with some modifications. So this requirement came from the Air Force itself to the Air Headquarters that we would like to continue to use this aircraft or see this aircraft, in service. And that is how in 1976, 77, the first of the Ajeets entered squadron service. And they continued to fly up to 1991.
91? Wow.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
impressive.
Yes.
Really impressive, actually. I thought it would be 80s at the most, but that's...
No.
Wow.
1991. In fact, I flew the Ajeet from 1984 to 87 is the time that I switched over to Jaguars.
So I want to talk about DACT. Obviously, you mentioned just before you went up against the 21s, but can you tell in a bit more detail what the fight was like going up against one?
Getting into a fight with the MiG-21, because when we start dissimilar air combat training, you begin at a certain altitude. So it's not like you're taking off together and getting into a fight
Yes.
immediately. It is at medium level altitude. So if we began the fight at 10-12,000 feet, then certainly the Ajeet was at a disadvantage in maneuvering in the vertical plane. Because the thrust of a MiG-21 was much more than an Ajeet at those altitudes. But in a turning fight, you would find that you could actually cut corners in that circle and continue to close in behind the MiG-21. Or if you could manage to get away from his visual bubble, then you could actually pounce back on the MiG-21 without him, getting to know that there's an aircraft lurking, behind me. So it had a distinct advantage because of its size and because of its turning performance.
And was it a quick aircraft?
30 seconds. The quickest time from scramble, we've scrambled and been airborne in less than a minute and a half. That means if you're sitting in your, tent or something in your crew room and the scramble alert goes up, you run to the aircraft, jump into the cockpit, get yourself strapped up. About 30 to 35 seconds for, CB switches on, start, and you're rolling in about 40-45 seconds.
That's amazing.
It can't be better than that.
Absolutely. And did you work with other nations while flying the Ajeet, or was it just the Indian Air Force you worked with?
I worked with the Indian Air Force only.
Okay.
You mean to say?
Yeah, did you not work with the British Nats or their pilots or any other nations?
No. You see, till the 2000s, I think the Indian Air Force was very insular, and our engagement with the other air forces was actually limited to getting trained on the aircraft that we acquired. To give you an example, if the Indian Air Force acquired the MiG-23s or the MiG-27s, the pilots went to Russia, they got trained, and they came back and they flew the aircraft. There were very few exercises that were taking place with the other air forces. Similarly, with the Americans or the RAF, the training was limited to getting training on the Hunter, the Canberra, or the Nat in the initial phase itself, and thereafter we were actually much on our own till the Indian Air Force started exercising in 2003-4 when we exercised with the USAF and Red Flag and Cope Thunder, and then of course now it's big time.
Yeah. So what squadron were you with, and where were you based on the Ajeet?
I was in two squadron, the second oldest squadron of the Indian Air Force.
Oh, right.
Number 2 squadron is called the Winged Arrows, and it was based in West Bengal, in Kalaikunda, the base called Kalaikunda.
So that must have been a lot of fun. You must have felt, like a real fighter pilot, like in a proper frontline squadron. Not jealous at all.
No.
But before we move on, could you share maybe a couple of stories from your time on the jet that our viewers might find interesting?
We also had a role of flying in the valleys. The squadron had an operational role in the northeast where the country ends, and you have China on the other side where in the hump, so as to say, where World War II conflict took place and all. So we used to fly over there in the valleys and carry out valley flying. So There's another, interesting incident that I can narrate wherein not me, but one of the pilots from the squadron, went for a valley flying sortie into one of the valleys, and we didn't have any GPS. You were navigating by the thumb, moving thumb display on the map, and this two aircraft formation went in for valley flying, and suddenly one of them enters a cloud, and he doesn't know what happened. He just by the time he recovers, he finds that the ground is rushing at him like crazy, and he could see trees and leaves and branches and all that, and he pulls back at the stick and comes out of the aircraft and finds the leader is nowhere to be seen. So anyhow, this boy comes back, lands, and legs trembling, sweating. He comes back home. Comes back to the crew room. He finds the leader, telling him that this officer's name was Chopi. He says, "Chopi, where were you?" And this youngster is so angry, he feels like giving a smack to his leader, that you have the nerve of asking me where were you. So he catches him by his collar, takes him to a isolated crew room and all, and this guy and Chopi is telling him, you see what I went through. I could have killed myself. So the leader actually reaches into his pockets and pulls out leaves, a few leaves and shrubs, and tells him that I've just pulled this out from the drop tank pylon of my aircraft. You're telling me, my wife would have been a widow this evening, but come, we'll have a drink over and we'll have dinner together and celebrate.
Wow.
So it was like that.
Lucky boy. So, how many hours did you get on the aircraft, and how would you sum it up?
Well, I did about 260, 70 hours, about thereabouts, on the Ajeet. We did a lot of flying. Aircraft availability was never a problem. Because the Ajeet had a bubble canopy, something like the F-16 that you see, there would be a lot of glare of the instrument lights and all.
Okay.
So our squadron, the 2 squadron, was the last squadron to continue flying the Ajeet till it got phased out. And our squadron started doing night flying as well in those days. Before that, the NAT didn't do night flying. The Ajeet didn't do night flying. So we were, I think we are a handful of a few people at that time in the Air Force who could say that we were fully operational on the Ajeet, because we managed to complete our night flying syllabus as well on the Ajeet. So it was a unique experience, and I'm very proud of having flown that aircraft.
Oh yeah, absolutely.